If you isolated certain indicators of economic health, like for instance the stock market, you might conclude that a solid recovery is underway. But look just past the Dow's return to the 10,000 mark and you'll see unemployment rates higher than have been seen in decades. Where have the jobs gone and are they coming back? This week on Dialogue, the Jobless Recovery. Hello again and welcome to the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. I'm John Molesky. Each week, Dialogue explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. This week is the second of our new monthly feature, the Wilson Center Spotlight. Each month, we'll focus on one of the Center's programs and hear from scholars, fellows, staff, and special guests engaged in research and reporting on a broad range of issues and ideas. This month, we turn our focus to the Center's program on America and the global economy as we explore the current unemployment situation in the country. Our guests for today's discussion are Amy Wilkinson. Amy is a senior fellow at the Harvard University Center for Business and Government and is also a public policy scholar at the Wilson Center. And Kent Hughes is director of the Wilson Center's program on America and the global economy. He's also director of the Wilson Center on the Hill program. Welcome to both of you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having us, John.
Kent, let's begin talking about the program that you direct here. As we put your program in the spotlight, tell us about your work.
Well, thank you for the spotlight. The PAGE program on America and the global economy, looks at three broad areas. First is innovation. How does the whole innovation system work here and in other countries around the world? And how is it really becoming more and more of a global phenomenon? Second, we look at globalization, particularly the economic aspects. What are we doing in terms of international finance, international trade, flows of technology and capital? And third, we focus on the long-term future of the American economy. And under that label, we look at a lot of key questions, infrastructure investment, of course, in innovation, and also in particular, more recently, we focused on K-12 education, one of the Achilles heels of America's economic future.
Ken, how long has the program been around?
We've been around in one guise or another for about 8 years. And we are fortunate that we've gotten enough support to keep going.
And how much has it changed over the course of those 8 years? When we talk about globalization as a framing device, things are changing rapidly. Does your area of inquiry, area of study change along with it?
Well, there's no question that this latest Great Recession, Great Panic, as some call it, has really affected how we look at globalization. In particular, we've been spending some time thinking about and holding programs on how did we get into this financial mess, how are we going to get out of it, and what kind of structure should we have going forward to help make sure that we don't have the next crisis and that globalization really works for everyone.
And in the intro, I also mentioned that you direct the Wilson Center on the Hill program. Briefly tell us what that's all about.
Well, that's a new program. We're just into our second year, and we want to say a special thank you to the Hewlett Foundation who has funded this effort. And we're focused really very much on questions of international development, looking at developing countries, the question of sustainable development, what role does international trade play, how does the global economy play into their economic future. And we feature talent really from around the Wilson Center, from around the country, and at times from around the world, who help bring that kind of understanding to Capitol Hill.
And physically on the Hill. This is the road show.
They're all physically on the Hill. I have to confess that I misspent much of my youth working on Capitol Hill as a staff person, and it is such an intense, demanding environment that you just can't get off the Hill.
So a recovering staff person creating programming for people still in the program.
Hopefully recovering.
Well, let's shift gears to the unemployment picture. A dreary thing to be talking about at holiday time or any time. But maybe what I can ask first, the thing that you put your heads together on is the notion of how bad the problem is. Let's try to quantify that. We talk about an unemployment rate that's on the north side of 10%. But then some argue that really you're talking about something that's closer to 17 or 18% when you factor in underemployment, people who've given up. Sort that out for us, if you could. What are the indicators that people look at, and which are the ones that paint the most accurate picture?
Sure. Well, we're at a 26-year high for unemployment.
26 years.
Right. And it's at 10%, down a little bit from 10.2. But we've seen 7 million people lose jobs since the recession was officially named a recession in 2007. And we've also seen an unemployment rate go up from 7.6% when Obama first took office. So this is a serious problem certainly for the country, also for this administration.
What is this higher number that people will refer to?
Well, they are talking about a couple of the elements that you mentioned. A lot of people have become what are technically referred to as discouraged workers. They've been looking and not finding, and the month when we did the latest survey, they just had given up. They weren't looking that particular month. That group, coupled with a group that are working part-time, but desperately want to find full-time work. And you put those together with the officially unemployed, and then you are approaching something like 17+%.
How has the way that we track these numbers changed over time? I've read some things about in the Reagan years, the President Reagan started to count military into the employment figure, which artificially bumps up the employment rate. And then in the Clinton years, started to take people off the doles that had stopped looking for work, even though they were officially unemployed. Has there been a political aspect to the way this number has tracked, and is the result a number that is artificially low?
I think the Bureau of Labor Statistics does its best to keep politics out of the numbers so that you really can compare one year to the next. What is interesting about this particular time is that more and more people have picked up that higher figure, that is the 17%, which is a perfectly legitimate figure if you're clear about what you're adding to it. It is a proxy, I think, for how serious the situation is and how much we need to think about a strategy to move into the future that really is going to generate jobs.
Amy, I'm not trying to be excessively negative here, but I'm trying to paint an accurate depiction of the depth of the problem. And another thing people will say is that even when you look at employment figures, when people had jobs, wages have been stagnant, gap between rich and poor has been growing. So even with a job, people were in some dire economic straits.
That's right. It's a very difficult time for many people in the United States and across the world. And one of the things I look at in my research is the next generation, right? The next generation of entrepreneurs or innovators. And we can also say that this very young group of Americans straight out of college are getting hit disproportionately hard. The unemployment numbers for people aged 20 to 25 are a lot higher on average. So if you look at certain communities, I'm also from the state of Oregon, so that's an industrial, timber-based economy, and so various counties across that state are hit disproportionately high if they're in the construction industry, for example. So there undoubtedly, there's a lot of pain going around, and it's hitting different groups of people or different geographies in different ways.
When you describe the impact on young people, it's almost like thinking of the swine flu as it's been different than other flus. It affects the young. Is this different in a recession and unemployment figures, that this young group, usually a group that will work for a cheaper wage and have been attractive to employers?
I think you usually see when you have this kind of recession, even past recessions, that it does hit young people disproportionately, hits African Americans disproportionately.
Why is that, Kent? Why is that group harder hit?
There are lots of theories, no really settled opinion yet. Some people look at the lingering impact of discrimination. The country has not always happy story with regard to the treatment of African Americans. So while you see this enormous change in the African American community moving into the middle class, there's still quite a number who haven't got the educational tools to do that. Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that's happened now is that men have been hit disproportionately, and partly it's because just what Amy was saying, that construction industry that is disproportionately male, and some of the frontline manufacturing jobs that have been disproportionately male.
So I'm going to disagree with this, and this is everyone's been hit pretty hard. My women demographic friends who are bankers in New York.
Gender wars.
Yeah, we're going to have a gender war of this. Think that women have been hit disproportionately hard because many women in professional jobs were hired under a diversity category. And once the economy gets hit really hard, the diversity hires are the first to go out the door. And so for the professional network 85 Broads, which is the Goldman Sachs Women's Network out of New York and extended across across many of those organizations, not only banks, they're quite concerned that for women, that this is a slide backwards for professional women as well. So, there's a lot of difficulty on all sides, I think.
The pattern, I'm sorry, Kent, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that one of the structural elements here that really has been hit is manufacturing and the financial community. So most experts would say that a lot of the financial jobs that have been lost are not going to come back. The advantage that people in the financial world may have is they have a lot of skills that they may not even realize. They might be able to walk into a teaching job in terms of finance or mathematics or science. One of the things that Amy has really taught me is this potential for starting entrepreneurial jobs in the midst of hard times.
Right.
Every one of those jobs at some point is going to need financial advice. How do they go public? How do they raise money? So having those added skills will make that group of people their future is a little more promising than if you happen to be, let's say, a high school dropout, where you're really in trouble.
I agree with that.
What about these manufacturing jobs? Will they come back?
Well, there's a long-term trend, two long-term trends. One is that we've run over the past several years enormous trade and current account deficits. That's really had a negative impact on our manufacturing sector in the industrial base. And second, if you look at some of the productivity figures, which are a way of saying we're getting more with fewer people, that really is going to continue to hit the manufacturing sector. So some people looking in the very long term would say, well, manufacturing in terms of frontline jobs, as you develop robotics and other advanced tools, will begin to look more like agriculture. So over long periods of time, you're going to substitute machines for people, and then we say what we want to have as strategies to make sure those people have the kind of educational tools in their mind that let them move on to something else.
I would actually say the manufacturing jobs as we know them are probably not going to come back, or certainly not in the numbers that we've seen in the past. And to try to put a little bit more positive spin on this, I think we should be looking at tomorrow's jobs and creating tomorrow's jobs. So instead of preserving jobs that may not come back, I think we should be training and looking and trying to foster and nurture the jobs that will create tomorrow.
Let's stick with this for a second. How far do we go when we imagine this new thing? Because you do get a sense that some people are just biding their time thinking that things will go back to as they were 5 years ago or something like that. And what I'm hearing from you and everyone else is that's not going to happen. So is it not only new jobs, but is it new ways of thinking about work and how many hours constitute a work week and how many people are employable as a percentage of the whole? How much are we imagining something brand new?
I think, well, a lot of people are talking about the new normal, right? And then what does that mean and what does it look like and how do you kind of navigate in the new normal? And I would say that there are so many examples, Kent and I talk about this frequently, of new companies. So I was in business school 10 miles from Google in 2002. That's when the tech bubble burst. That was a gloom and doom time. Google was really not on the radar screen of very many people 7 years ago. And today, that company employs 20,000 people. And so I think the question is, how do we foster the next
Where's the
Google?
next? How do we?
Yeah.
How do we foster the
well,
next?
so now what I think three things in particular. I think we try to give access to credit for small businesses and new businesses. So there's Census Bureau data that's out. The Kauffman Foundation has just done a big study that it is businesses under 5 years old that have created all of the net new jobs since 1980. So that basically means we want new companies. And in Silicon Valley, you certainly see that. It is eBay, Yahoo, Google, Hewlett-Packard, et cetera. All of these have been new companies.
And are policies addressing these things that you're describing?
I think they're starting to. So we saw a speech that President Obama gave at the Brookings Institute where he's starting to say, okay, we need to create jobs and we need to fund small businesses or new businesses to do that.
There's a list. This is from the article you wrote recently about entrepreneurialism, or entrepreneurship, whichever is a better word instead of making one up. But here are startups during downturns.
Right.
Here is Disney, Burger King, Federal Express, CNN, Microsoft. So we're not talking about small businesses over the long term. These are some of the most prominent businesses on the planet Earth.
That's right. So those businesses all started in an economic downturn. So this is not a terrible time to start a business. In fact, I am trying to tell people it's the bootstrapper's paradise in some ways. If you can get some access to credit and capital now, You can hire people at cheaper wages. There are more people looking for jobs. You can rent space as a business owner because you can negotiate some agreements there. You can potentially find sales on equipment. You can do a whole lot of things to get a business up and running now if you just have the access to capital to start.
Kent, what does this current crisis say about the big picture of capitalism, consumer-based capitalism, and the prospects for the long term?
Well, one of the risks we've taken over the last several years is we've been borrowing a lot of money from the rest of the world, and we've been using it for consumption, not investment. So unlike, let's say, the 19th century, where British capital and European capital helped open the West, built the railroads, steel mills, instead, in a way, we've been having a good time. And we really need to reverse that. And it's going to take big adjustments in the world economy.
When did that culture change? You know, Benjamin Barber talks about this in relation to democracy and says that, you know, the kind of capitalism we need is capitalism that addresses real needs, not capitalism that manufactures artificial needs. And that seems to be what you're describing is the good time and quick turnaround on profit, not investing in something that will turn a profit 2 years from now, but next quarter.
There was kind of a national mania, not for everybody, but for large numbers of people. In the financial world, things were going so well that people, I think, willfully ignored many of the warning signs. When you had a TV show that was saying, flip this house, and you weren't really adding value, or you're just being sharp, getting in there quick, turning it over quickly, or the kind of thing that you would see in general as people just focused on water cooler talk about what about the new car and so forth. So there was a sense that times were awfully good. And we didn't really, I think it was a failure of national leadership, public and private, that didn't focus on the risks that were involved in borrowing so much from the rest of the world. I want to go back to manufacturing for just a sense, because I think that, in fact, we need to focus on restoring that industrial and manufacturing base, not just as a jobs focus, and not saying we're going to bring back the old jobs. But if we want to think of green jobs, of the new ideas that are coming out of American laboratories, you need to have an industrial base to turn those in to actual investment, growth, and good jobs.
Is this one of the downsides of globalization? Have the jobs of making things just left the country?
I think it was not so much a downside of globalization. I do put it back in both on the leadership and a set of ideas that we bought. We kind of wanted to say the world works the way we want it to work in terms of it being a free market, when in fact East Asia and other countries around the world have had clear strategies that depended on generating large export surpluses. And you can't have a large export surplus unless somebody else has a big deficit, and we became the world's consumer of last resort. There were some gains, no doubt, from that particular relationship, but it's really not sustainable over the long term. And more specialists think that that flow of capital that came in, and we bought things and people reinvested here, helped create the environment in which this financial crisis was possible.
Amy, the types of jobs, the scenario that you've described, and you make a compelling argument, especially the fact that most jobs are created by companies that have been around for 5 years or less.
Right.
It certainly makes the case. But this isn't going to happen overnight. This isn't going to get people back to work next month or even next year necessarily. What about the short-term fixes that are on the table? People like Paul Krugman have suggested spend more on stimulus, create jobs, put people back to work now, rebuild the infrastructure.
Sure.
Is this part of the mix?
Yes. Oh, without a doubt. And President Obama has put out a plan to repair bridges, to build airports. For anyone who's been in China in the last year, their airports are beautiful, and the infrastructure is definitely there compared to our airports. If you go to JFK or LAX, or now Dulles Airport is under construction,
or
which is
bridges
great.
falling into
Sure,
to
that's
lakes.
right. And so that kind of stimulus and job creation opportunity, without a doubt, is something we also need to be doing.
Can we do it? I mean, can we afford it?
Well, this is the question. So right now, with the national debt as high as it is, this is a political question in Washington. How much will we spend on that? Would it be, I've heard numbers around $70 billion additional dollars, or would we take that out of $200 billion that may be coming back into the TARP? And what are sort of the rules and regulations around what we do with that TARP money that we've already allocated? That will definitely be debated. I have an idea that I would love to throw into the mix, and Silicon Valley talks about this quite a lot. Washington doesn't as much. But I think with the too big to fail focus and with all the funding that we've sent towards big banks and big auto, that what you could do is send a small amount of funding, relatively, to early stage investors. Because early stage investors, who are the venture capitalists, the angel investors, the innovators, they know how to pick and invest in small businesses. And the research is showing us that small businesses create jobs. So in terms of how much will it cost, I think we could send, $100 million as matching funds, for example, to some early stage investors and do a lot more. Pound for pound, the bang for the buck is there. It's not necessarily in too big to fail institutions.
Kent, Amy invoking Silicon Valley raises the question about it. Is this, some critics have said we got the big problem is we have the people who made the mess trying to clean up the mess. Too Washington-centric or Wall Street-centric. These are the people who are the architects of where we are today, and they're the ones who are going to fix it, versus looking somewhere else in the country or the world for answers. What are your thoughts on this?
I think when you looked at what happened after the failure of Lehman in September of 2008, the world, not just the United States, did appear to be on the edge of the cliff. And I think in this case, Bernanke, Paulson, Geithner, and now Bernanke and Geithner and Larry Summers, I think they felt, and they were right, they had to do something to stop this.
You could add Bush and then Obama.
Yes, that's right.
That's right.
I mean, there was a continuity here, and there was a look at what was potentially the start of another really Great Depression. Not just a Great Panic, not just a Great Recession, but a real Great Depression. And they had to move and move quickly, and they made some errors, I think, as you look back, that had you had a little more time to reflect, you might have structured things somewhat differently. But they really had to act. They did, and they've taken that first step. What I haven't seen happen yet, and I'm really building on Amy's comments, is a flow of funds to not only the entrepreneur in Silicon Valley, but the community bank that lends to all kinds of small businesses. That having a Dunkin' Donut franchise may not drive the future, but it puts people to work. Mm-hmm. And we need to think about that, as well as the kind of investments that Amy talked about in infrastructure, in education, in the entrepreneurs who really will be tomorrow's Google and tomorrow's Microsoft.
On this notion of more stimulus, essentially, and you said it's obviously a political question. Right. It's also a math question. There are some who make the case that you can spend your way out of this, and this is no time to worry about deficits.
I do worry about deficits. I may be just a little old-fashioned, but I do worry about deficits.
The country seems to as well.
Not only the fiscal deficit here and the public debt, but the international deficits and debts that we run up. The latter really affect, as I said, our industrial base. They also affect our foreign policy and the prospects for global leadership. On the other hand, as I listen to what Obama and his team are saying, they're not sort of saying, let's just have a big tax cut and hope it works out, or let's not just have a lot of spending. Milton Friedman at one point suggested if you really wanted stimulus, just take a helicopter and drop money out the window and you'd be all set. I think what they're looking at are two kinds of things. One, very targeted at jobs, and second, they're trying to target it in ways that today's investment, today's job, actually lays the basis for future productivity growth. And I think that's the right way to go.
If we do all the things that are reasonable to do, how soon till the needle starts to move? And I'm thinking right now, there are people watching us who are out of work.
Sure.
And this is a very personal discussion for them, and they're looking for some signs from us or from anyone. What can we say to them as far as how quickly we can expect to see jobs reemerging at some significant rate?
Well, the Fed has put out a prediction for a year from now, which is a 9.5% unemployment rate. So that's not a significant move. If we're at 10 now, and in the fourth quarter of 2010 is projected at 9.4 to 9.7, that kind of means we may be in a steady as she goes kind of situation. And so my advice is definitely try to put yourself in these pockets of opportunity, whether it's line up for weatherization of your own home. That's a program being talked about. Or try to figure out how to get into some kind of an innovation space, because that will grow despite recessionary economy. I think it's trying to be smart. Everyone has learned to take smarter risks, right? And try to line up in a more proactive stance. So.
What about that, Kent? The personal survival guide. What can you tell folks?
Well, I would like to see a very active approach to what I think is the right kind of unemployment. For instance, right kind of employment. For an example, I'd quintuple AmeriCorps. I'd go back to the teacher's corps that we used to have and make it a teacher's assistant corps. These are temporary jobs. This is not a long-term job.
Building a bridge.
But it brings people into education. A lot of them will be exposed to education in a way that they like and might want to pursue it. And you know, the baby boom teachers are going to start retiring very soon. I would also look at Amy's idea of weatherization. I think that's a very good idea. It can move quickly. It serves several masters at once, or kills several birds with the same stone. You've got a lot of unemployed construction workers. That's heavily U.S. domestic stimulus. And it also serves our other two goals of energy security and doing something long-term about climate change. I think Amy's idea about infrastructure is right on target. And if we had a strategy that was credible and said, look, we're going to, as an example, we're going to build a new higher speed railway between here and LaGuardia. And we're going to do that in part because we can't really expand the airports anymore. And yet we project traffic's going to grow. So if you have that credible plan, you start putting people to work right now, not the people who actually do the construction, but all the people who are doing the planning, drawing the plans, and people will start saying, well, you know, with this higher speed, I can put something in, let's say, Wilmington, that will be an effective business. It will help create the environment that will be seized upon by the kind of entrepreneurs that Amy's talking about.
Well, yeah, and I'll say one thing. The silver lining here is that over half of the Fortune 500 companies in 2009 started in a recession. So we know that there's hope out there. And I think one of the positive messages is that net worth is no longer really calculated in dollars. And especially during the holidays, it's nice to think about people's health, their families, you know, the fact that we live in a free country. And so I actually think the financial crisis is resetting some of our ideas about net worth. So
that is a silver lining that we'll take to the bank, and we will end on that. Thank you for joining us today. We're out of time. In addition to thanking our guests, we want you to know that we appreciate your comments and encourage you to share them with us. You can do so by sending email to dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. And to learn more about the Wilson Center's program on America and the global economy, please visit us on the web at www.wilsoncenter.org. On behalf of all of us at the Wilson Center, I want to take this opportunity to wish you and your families a most happy and healthy holiday season. We'll be back next week with another edition of Dialogue. Until then, as always, we thank you for watching.
Dialogue is a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHZ Networks. Dialogue is available via broadcast, cable, satellite, and telco on MHZ Worldview throughout the United States. To see how to watch where you live, visit www.mhznetworks.org.